The governor essentially can implement any federal policy that is meant for general welfare. Why we haven't done it so far is a question you have to ask a different person, but I plan on expanding Medicaid as quickly as possible within my powers.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I have with me independent write-in candidate for governor, Jared Budlong. Jared, starting off, let's just introduce yourself to the audience. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you running for office? And why are you running for office as an independent? So we've got a lot there. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So my name is Jared Budlong. I live in Daphne, Alabama, and I'm sick of seeing the way our state runs things and treats its residents. So in October of last year, in 2021, our state allocated 20% of our COVID relief funds towards building new prison facilities. At the time, they were aiming for 3. They're actually aiming for 3 private prisons, and that got shot down eventually, thankfully. But we decided to spend COVID relief. We were trying to help people in a pandemic, or should have been, and ended up putting money towards prisons. And that got me more interested in the inner workings of politics than I had ever had been in the past. And the more I dig, the worse it seems to get. And no one running at the time, nor anyone currently running, seems to want to say the hard part out loud, which is Alabama still relies on slave labor and doesn't want to do anything about it. In fact, wants more. So that's what got me to run.
Really, that's an interesting, that's an interesting thing to motivate somebody to run, because thinking about prisoners and their well-being it's not often the driving, the motivating thing. It's something that people care about, and it's something that some people care about. Some people obviously could care less, right? But that's an interesting motivating factor to run for office, and not only run for governor, and then not only run for governor as an independent. So like we are, many steps removed from kind of the norm, right? So what is it about that issue that was so motivating for you to do this?
Well, first, we have to go back to what we were all taught in high school. I know I was back when I was in school in the late 90s, early aughts. And, I was always taught that slavery was abolished. That's what we were told. They didn't have us read through the 13th Amendment. They kind of just said, yeah, 13th Amendment, abolish slavery. And then they casually leave off the except as punishment for a crime. And I didn't know that until very recently. And then to find out that we in our state are using that exclusion, or that clause, to not only do the thing that most people are aware of, which is, kitchen work, laundry work, and like the necessary labor to run the facility is run off of free labor, the inmates that are the incarcerated individuals that are inside. But we also create manufacturing roles that are managed by the state through ACI, Alabama Correctional Industries, and we pay our incarcerated individuals. The last report I could find at least had 13 to 25 cents an hour to build furniture, make chemicals, do other various tasks that create goods and services that are, at least originally we were told that it was intended to offset the cost of the prison system. And then to find out that that's essentially a lie, because you can only sell those products and services back to other state agencies. So it's all tax money, no matter what, that gets spent on these things. And it's just, the more I dug, it just got worse and worse. And to know that one thing that people don't think about, and this is kind of what triggered it, is that we are all essentially one law, whether it's a new law, an existing law that we're not aware of, or a previous law that now comes back into play, which we found recently with Roe v. Wade. We're all one law away from being a criminal. And depending on, what law that ends up being, you could end up in prison. And then it's not your choice to leave. Like, you have no say, especially in Alabama.
Right. And this is something that it would be nice, I think, if we could say, just for the sake of humanity, we should be treating other people well. But as a practical matter, to subject criminals, quote unquote, to this egregious treatment is not good for the rest of us, because we know that, what is it? You may know that because it seems like you're deeper in this issue than I am, but it's something like 95%, 97% of people in Alabama's prisons are gonna be back out on the street, right? And so, and that's the way that even the most hardened, like, I hate criminals, tough on crime guy out there, he's not gonna say that you should do life, even for violent assault. Even if you shoot somebody and you blow their knee out, right? They're not going to say you should do life in prison for that. Nobody's going to say that, right? And that's
very few.
And that's a terrible thing, to blow somebody's knee out, right? But
Right.
Proportionality, I think, is important, and proportionality would dictate that 97% of these people are going to be back out on the streets at some point. And so, how are we preparing them to re-enter society? Well, we are preparing these people to re-enter society as gang members, as drug addicts, as people who can't get gainful employment because they have a felony on their record. I mean, the whole system is it is not designed to help the people who are accused of crimes, or anybody else for that matter. It's just designed to oppress people.
Yeah, it's a punitive system, and that we should have learned in the last 300 or 400 years that doesn't do anything, because we have been putting more people in prison over those years. Now that it ebbs and flows, and I'll admit that in our state we saw a decline in incarcerated individuals for a bit, and it started to go back up, and that's partially due to our recidivism rate, which you mentioned. People leave. But in Alabama, we have a 30% recidivism rate on average, and that's only counting 3 years post being reintroduced into society. So if we only count the first 3 years, it's still 30%. So I'm curious. I don't think the data is available that the state will give us, because they're not transparent on a lot. I would be curious what that looks like at 15 or 20 or 25 years, and see how high that rate is. Because 30% is bad enough, and if we're only counting 3 years, like it should be obvious to the public that our system isn't doing what we've been told it's supposed to do, which is corrections or rehabilitation. That's not what it's doing, and I don't think that's what it's ever been intended to do. And I'll introduce that with one stat. Our first prison, as we know them now in Alabama, was built in Wetumpka in 1844. And 4 years later, they started selling the labor of those who were incarcerated. So since 1848, we have been selling incarcerated individuals' labor as a state. It's never been about rehabilitation. It has always been about labor.
And so what is the, to what degree can the governor unilaterally fix some of these issues? What are some of the things that you would do, day one type stuff? And then what are some of the things that are going to have to be legislative fixes that you would have to get broader public support for?
Yeah, most of it's legislative, and I'm fully aware of that. And I try to make sure everyone that I talk to, especially those who are either inside right now or their loved ones, I try to let them know I can't fix most of the things that you're seeing, and thankfully they're catching on. But there are some things that I would like to do first day, and a lot of that's to address the current conditions. So right now, Alabama is currently being sued by the federal government, by the DOJ, for the conditions of our prisons, and this is the second time that has happened. It happened in the late 70s, early 80s for similar conditions. And we didn't fix it on our own then. So the federal government took over our prisons back in the late 80s. And we're in a very similar situation now, where people are dying on a nearly daily basis from drug overdoses, assault. We've got unalivings, self-unalivings. I don't know how we want to phrase that here on the radio, but people taking their own life. And the danger isn't only to the incarcerated individuals. It's actually not safe for the staff that work there, mostly because they are understaffed. They're actually, the last count that I saw was about a third of the necessary staff is what they have on hand. And that makes it dangerous for everybody. So the first thing I would like to do when coming in is actually fulfill the purpose and keep people safe there by, and it sounds extreme and I'm fully aware, declaring a state of emergency, because that's where we're at. We have people dying on a nearly daily basis. It's a very, very defined group of people who are in danger on a daily basis. So we'll declaring a state of emergency and bringing in the National Guard to fill in the gaps until we can get it safe enough to then actually hire people through the normal channels, and then let the National Guard, go back to doing their thing and let them go back into being reservists, right? We don't need them there all the time or full time, but I want to fill the gaps in staffing, but also have some extra oversight. We want, right now, there's a problem with corruption and there's a problem with contraband making it into the prisons. And it was happening even at the height of COVID, which means there were no visitations, and yet things were still getting in. And from what I've heard from those who are on the inside and their loved ones, it was correctional officers, but also things being able to be snuck over a fence or tossed over a fence because there were staffing shortages. They weren't seeing that stuff being brought in. And, we have got to address that. And part of that is having enough people. So that's kind of what I want to do firsthand. Moving from there, a lot of it is legislative. The Board of Pardon and Paroles needs to be reined in as best I can. And that's a tricky one. I'm not sure, how deep you want to go into it, because we could go pretty deep into this conversation, but I know we're limited on time. So.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about some other issues. What are some of the other things that you would be running on and that you would want to be that you would want to see executed as governor? Let's say, I don't know, top 3 other issues.
Yeah, so the other 2 for me, for the most part, would be healthcare and education. Our healthcare in our state, practically everybody I talk to is aware that our healthcare is subpar at best. And we have to, at the very least, expand Medicaid. From everything I've been able to find, again, I'm a guy from Daphne who decided to run for governor because I'm tired of our options not wanting to do real change. And everything I can find says the governor essentially can implement any federal policy that is meant for general welfare that falls under on my plate. So why we haven't done it so far is a question you have to ask a different person, but I plan on expanding Medicaid as quickly as possible within my powers so that we can get, I think the most recent count I saw was 340,000 people could get coverage. And those are working class, everyday people who work enough to not get Medicare, but can't get in privatized healthcare insurance. They're in a gap. They're in that weird spot where, you're just out of luck if you're in that place. So we've got to expand that to get people more access to at least the bare minimum. Medicaid's not perfect and it's not great, but it gets people some coverage. Mm-hmm. And from that, the nice part, because people usually say, all right, well, who's going to pay for it? 90% of the coverage expansion is covered by federal. So we would be paying, a dime for every dollar. And the nice part is that when we start implementing expansion, it frees up other existing spending that we are doing on our own as a state and paying for at the state level to relocate or reallocate those fundings to things like mental health care or reopening hospitals, hopefully in rural counties. Because we've had, I think, 11 hospitals close in rural counties or rural areas over the last, I want to say it was the last 9 years or so. We've had about 11 close, and most of those in the rural counties, they actually operate in the red. They don't make money, and that's why they end up shutting down. And part of that is people don't have the ability to go and actually be confident that they would not end up bankrupt because they went to the hospital. So that's healthcare. And then education is probably the next biggest for me on my priority list. Education, our state does things very backwards from most states. So I can't increase our funding. That's actually a legislative concern, but we can allocate our funding more equitably. So the plan is to actually focus our existing yet subpar funding on schools that need it most, rather than the arbitrary system that we have set up where we take an average number of students, take an average of what those students might need and say, here's your budget, figure it out, school board. And we don't account for little nuanced things like, there is a higher percentage of English language learners in this school, So they might need more funding for an extra teacher or an extra, what is the term for them? They are,
Translator.
it's a paraprofessional, right? So it's like a teacher aide, somebody like that, and give extra funding for those, or for, an extra librarian or extra IT staff, because you have kids who can't make it in for whatever reason. They need more rural remote support through virtual learning or things like that. We don't account for those directly. We do averages essentially, and just kind of let the schools handle it based on their budget, and then force the rest on the local property and business taxes, which, if you're in an area that's already poor, you don't have those extra tax revenues to then supplement what the state and federal is giving you already. So it just makes things worse the way we get our funding, but also how we allocate. It's kind of a double-edged sword hitting somebody. It's rough.
One of the things that the Republican supermajority is trying to push through on education that we saw in the last session, and we will almost certainly see in the next session, and probably with even more fervor than last time, because it's at the beginning of a quadrennium, and so the pressure is the least amount that they will have over the 4 years, because they are farthest away from an election, farthest away from accountability, is what they call school choice, what is in actuality school privatization. If the school choice bill, quote unquote, that they had last session passed, is that something that you would sign as governor?
If I'm remembering it correctly, we're talking about school vouchers and giving people the ability to take their funding that they would normally get through the process we were just talking about and choose where they put that funding. I would not sign it. It doesn't mean it wouldn't pass anyway. So this will be a shameless plug to make sure you're voting for your local representatives, not just the governor, but make sure you're voting people in who believe similarly to you and in your local area. But no, I don't support school vouchers. I've gotten into a couple heated discussions about charter schools, because I see them as a stopgap measure currently. I don't dislike the schools themselves. The concern is, we're not putting funding where it should be, which is why they exist. So the problem isn't the charter school, it's actually the funding issues currently. It's not, we're getting mad at the Band-Aid that we don't like the look of or the feel of, rather than the wound that's underneath. And I would rather focus on the actual problem.
So what are the biggest contrasts that you would want to draw between yourself and, since you're an independent candidate for governor, your two opponents, Yolanda Flowers, the Democrat, and Kay Ivey? Gosh, I can't.
You don't have to say her name. It's fine.
Yeah, Kay Ivey, the governor. What are some of the key things that you would want to contrast yourself between them?
First, let's be fair to the Libertarian Party. They did something incredibly impressive this year. They got themselves on the ballot. So there is a third party that'll be on the ballot. The Libertarians did it. They're on the sample ballot, and they have a governor candidate. I think it's Jimmy Blake. Don't know much about him, so I can't really contrast him. But I do want to be fair. There are three on ballot competitors. I'll say it that way. The Republican side, they're going to continue doing what the state's been doing. So pretty much everything I stand for is the opposite of what they stand for. They are the ones wanting to build new prisons with COVID money rather than spend it on our residents here in the state and help them in a pandemic. They are the ones that, passed an abortion ban 3 years before it was even feasible. So they were way ahead, trying to plan ahead for that. And, they don't support our transgender youth. I would say they don't support our transgender residents, but they've passed bills directly impacting our transgender youth. And, all of that's kind of the exact opposite of myself. On the Democratic side, my frustration with the candidate they currently have with Yolanda Flowers is it's a policy side, right? She is, or was, pro-life. She's claiming to be pro-choice now. There are receipts, so to speak, to say that she was pro-life previously and had an endorsement from a pro-life organization. And then that went down after, she started giving different messaging publicly. And she has previously said that she would rather sever I'm going to use this word. If we need to restart this phrase, let me know. But she would rather sever the genitals from certain prisoners or certain incarcerated individuals rather than rehab. That's concerning.
I would say.
And What's that?
Oh, I just said I would say, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. And then the last one is, the separation of church and state. Like I don't believe your religious beliefs belong on the campaign trail or in your functioning and in office, your actual position. And it seems like at least the Republican and Democratic candidates seem to promote their religious beliefs rather heavily. And at one point, Yolanda Flowers said that she thought we had aliens invading our planet because of people's reaction to her religious beliefs being used on the campaign trail, and that was, it's concerning. Not a huge fan there. Jimmy Blake, I don't know enough about yet. I have not seen a whole lot of his platform so far. I can speak to the Libertarian Party specifically, or broadly rather. Their beliefs typically are a little too individualistic for me. They're not considering what the good of the group. They're not usually looking at that. It's more, let me make sure I have my freedoms, not what can our state have as freedoms. It's more, make sure each person can have theirs. And that can lead down some very not good paths for the people around you.
Yeah, my freedom to lick the boots of the boss as fervently as I want and for as little money as they will pay me. Yeah, it's my kind of freedom. My freedom to die because I don't have health care is my kind of freedom.
If you're curious about the weird ways that can play out, just look up libertarians and Bear City. Just go look that up. For anybody who's listening, if you're not aware, go look that up and you'll understand where the breakdown happens when you're worried about personal freedom but not worried about the good of the group.
That Yolanda Flowers situation was really frustrating to me, and I think, I have less of an issue with people with people being on their sleeves about their religious beliefs maybe than you do. But like, I'm totally fine with people saying, my faith motivates me to do X, Y, and Z, and whatever. But the thing that is an issue for me is that she was anti-abortion. I'm almost certain there was an explicit "I'm pro-life" quote unquote, and like you said, she was endorsed by Democrats for Life, a pro-life organization, and it's less that it's inspired by her religion to me as that is bad. And it's not rooted in anything except because there's no other justification other than a religious belief that it's bad to have an abortion, to outlaw abortion. That's the only justification that you can have for it, and that's why she was opposed to it. And then there was this frustration that I had of her backtracking on it. Like, we're all idiots and we didn't just see everything that happened. It's if you're an anti-abortion Democrat, just be that and own it. And I'm sure there are lots of anti-abortion Democrats. If that's your platform, own it and let us decide. Don't treat us like we're children. It was very
there's an entire group that previously endorsed her of those people. So they have a group. Stick with them. Yeah, and it's not that I have a problem with people having religious beliefs. That's fine. But the level of how often it was used on everyday posts throughout her campaign was kind of the frustration point. It was consistently in there rather than my beliefs dictate that here's why I'm doing this because of my beliefs and what I believe. It was more of like just felt like Sunday sermon every day on the campaign trail, which was, I know that we have a group of people in our state, or groups of people who aren't of that particular faith. And it doesn't reassure them that I care about how they feel about things if I'm going to espouse my personal beliefs from the campaign trail. Like, there are people who their history has not been treated well by that particular belief, not necessarily in recent history, but it's not, there's a sore spot there, and I don't want that. I wouldn't want that to be a concern. So
her Facebook posts were definitely pretty weird. So let's talk about some some union issues at the state level. We had on the show some time ago Tim James, who was running for the Republican nomination for governor,
Mhm.
and he really impressed us with some real commitments that he made to support the striking miners. I think that even at the time I was a bit skeptical that he meant any of it, and I think that his actions since then have proved that he didn't. But some of the things that he said were really the things themselves were really legit. And some of the things that he mentioned was that the governor's office has the authority to investigate safety and environmental concerns.
Right.
And there are very much safety concerns with that mine. Some scabs have been hurt. There are very much environmental concerns. The Black Warrior River Keepers are now suing Warrior Met Coal because of an increase in pollution since the strike began. And the governor's office, the governor has the authority to do those investigations. The governor also has the authority to try to mediate a deal, to try to broker a deal. We've seen governors do that in the past, and we saw Labor Secretary Marty Walsh do that for BCTGM members in the Kellogg strike some time ago, and we saw Marty Walsh and President Biden do that with the rail strike. I think not as effectively as they did in the BCTGM strike. I think they gave too much to the companies, and I think that we're going to see some rejections by the workers, and we'll see what happens there with the rails. But can we expect that level of action for the miners from a Governor Budlong?
Yeah, I'm here for the people of our state and to make sure that they're not being our state isn't being exploited as a whole. And I mean that holistically, not just the people, but our state itself. So the example I've given, since you bring up Warrior Met, people ask about additional revenues, and it's not something I can do. But if it were pie in the sky and I had the ability to pick new places to get revenue for our state to pay for things like education or increasing healthcare outside of the savings from Medicaid we talked about earlier, I would look at things like Warrior Met, where they are not just exploiting our people, but they're also exploiting our state, our physical natural resources, and taking a very large profit from the last quarter. The last time I looked, it was, I think, 300 million that had net revenue, and they're still not wanting to effectively negotiate with those who have been with the company for long periods of time before it was Warrior Met and are making record profits. So, I would be looking at things like, let's maybe tax that company more, or the companies like that who literally can't do this work anywhere else. They have to be here. They are taking our resources and profiting off of that without giving back to our state. They're taking that money out of state at that point to private individuals or private groups who own shares and stocks. So I would love to support our workers to the best of my ability, including helping with those negotiations. And something we talked about, and I appreciated your input on this when we met at the rally, the 1 year rally up in Brookwood. And, I asked your opinion because I have not been actively involved in unions. I've never been a part of one. I know I'm learning more and more every day. But I asked what's one thing you could think of off the top of your head? And you mentioned that there are times where state troopers are escorting scabs across state lines to bring them in. And no, let's not do that. Let's not use state property to prop up a corporation. Let's help the people as best we can.
Yeah, not only giving scabs escorts through the picket line, but ticketing striking miners who are driving in front of the scab escort at the speed limit. They're pulling these striking miners over because they're getting in front of an emergency escort, which it's not an emergency to escort scabs. I'm sorry. And
not for the state.
Yeah, they're not traveling with them from out of state, but the scabs themselves are out of state. And the idea that you could get a ticket for going the speed limit is just insane.
Well, this is and you may want to cut this later. I don't know if you're going to like it on your show, but we have to be reminded that the police aren't actually here to protect the people. They're not here for that. That's the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled on that multiple times. I think it's Little Castle versus Gonzalez is one of them, where the decision was, they knew they were in danger, but they didn't have to. They don't have to protect the people. So we have to keep that in mind when we think about police at any level.
Yeah, we're not going to have to cut that because that is that's something that we have talked about a few times.
Cool.
Talking about how the police, the national leader of the quote unquote police union, is on local radio in Huntsville, caping for a literal convicted murderer who who is a member of the Huntsville police force. There was a Huntsville cop who was convicted of murder.
Is this the one where he shot somebody in the face with like a shotgun? Is it this
Yes,
one?
yeah, the suicidal
okay.
one. He was convicted of murder, and the Fraternal Order of Police, which is the largest police association in the country, they're still backing him. They're still backing his case. They're appealing it, and the leader of the national organization is on local talk radio here in the area talking about how it's so sad that cops can't go around killing people all the time. It's insane. It's insane. And of course, they're the only union, quote unquote, that's ever going to physically violently break a strike. Right? There's no other union is going to do that, but cops are more than happy to. And our listeners understand that, and our listeners know that.
So the National Fraternal Order of the Police, the person who's speaking isn't from Huntsville. He was just in Huntsville speaking because of the incident, correct?
He called into the show to talk about the incident. Yeah.
I was saying, if he's from here, that was news to me. But
no. I don't know where he's from, but it's not my understanding. I'm not aware if he's from. I don't think he's from.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So,
I just want to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding the statement. Cool.
Yeah. No, sorry about that. So one of the things that another thing that Governor Ivey has done recently is she has lobbied against project labor agreements. And now project labor agreements are something that they're agreements that either the government, if it's a government project, or a private company, if it's a private construction project, can enter into with trade unions to set standards for safety and wages and all this type of stuff before a project starts, so that we know that through this project these are the standards that we're going to have. It's like a collective bargaining agreement for a project, right? And the state of Alabama has long ago said we are not doing project labor agreements, and I think that we are seeing that one thing that we've seen recently, where the city of Birmingham and the Alabama Department of Transportation installed LED lights under the highways in downtown Birmingham, spent tens of millions, at least $5 to $10 million on LED lights under the highway from this fly-by-night non-union contractor, and literally months after it, the lights are flashing. Some of them aren't working. Some of them are the wrong color, right? And that doesn't happen on union. That doesn't happen on union sites. And so, would you, as a governor, lobby to reinstate the use of project labor agreements on state construction projects? And also, would you lobby for private construction in the state to utilize project labor agreements as well, unlike our governor, who literally made a trip to Japan to lobby against Toyota Mazda using a project labor agreement in their Huntsville location, at their Huntsville plant, which Toyota Mazda ended up doing. They ended up signing a project labor agreement to their benefit and to the benefit of Alabamians who are working on that project now and receiving higher wages and have better and safer working conditions. But to no thanks of Governor Ivey, who literally was trying to lobby this foreign company to pay her citizens less and to be able to use less local labor. What would you do on those two issues? State construction project labor agreements and private construction project labor agreements.
Assuming that it is not against our laws, for me to make sure that happens within my control. So I want to be careful how I say things. I will advocate for them for sure. Whether or not we can implement them, there are things that our state has signed into law or put into the Constitution at times that limits what our state can do. And outside of those, I will advocate as best I can for ensuring that people have the wages they need to live in our state, because we don't have a federal, or sorry, we have to abide by the federal minimum wage because our state doesn't have a minimum wage, and that is something I wish I could fix. I know that it is a legislative problem at this point. 2016, I'm sure you guys covered it at some point, but 2016, our state decided to limit the power of lower municipalities or smaller municipalities and keep them from implementing their own higher minimum wage. We basically said you have to follow the state minimum wage, except we don't have one, so you have to follow federal. So good luck surviving in our state.
Right. Yeah, that was very frustrating. Adam was actually involved in the Raise the Wage Huntsville campaign, and they were very much demoralized by that bill that came out of the legislature from people who ostensibly like home rule. But so grocery tax. For
we as against broadly speaking, if it is something you need to live, we need to make that as accessible as possible. Be careful how I phrase that, but I don't like the idea of people dying because they don't have money. I'm not a huge fan of that. That seems backwards as a society to let people do that.
So let's, as we're winding down, let's talk about your decision to run as an independent. What motivated that, and what good do you think are you hoping to bring about with your independent campaign?
Yeah, so I'll clarify one thing. I have been running under the moniker independent because that is what our state paperwork says when you're trying to get your name on the ballot. I am not a part of the independent party, so independent with a lower I. Whenever I
didn't know there was an independent party.
There is not in our state, but there is a broader independent party, and I'm not a part of that. It has caused some confusion since I started running, but it's the label that the state gives us on paperwork. So I wanted things to make sense whenever somebody started looking for my paperwork, because I knew that it would be something people would want to do, and not just say, oh yeah, that guy from Daphne's running. They would want to look it up and make sure. So I wanted to make sure everything I was putting out matched the paperwork. So running as an independent, essentially for me, is an unaffiliated candidate. I'm not affiliated with any major party. Twofold. When I decided to run, it was within a couple weeks of the ending of applying to run for a party. And I would not have been able to pull up I think it's 3% of the salary of the position you're running for. So in governor's case, I think it's $2,500 or so that I would have had to raise to apply the fee to run as a Democrat had I wanted to. And that wasn't going to happen based on the timeline. And second, I don't want to run as a Democrat or a Republican or Libertarian. I don't like the first two because their parties don't mean a whole lot. They are groups that work together that seem to be focused more on money than they are helping people. And to that same point, you can run as a Democrat as long as you sign a piece of paper, their bylaws, which don't get into a whole lot about things that actually help people, like healthcare, but they do mention being pro law and order, and you have to pay an exorbitant fee to be in their party in order to play their game. And that's about it. They'll let seemingly anybody, as long as they will sign that paper and pay a fee, to run as a Democrat. And to me, that doesn't mean anything. I don't want to be a part of that group specifically. I have people who do, and I support them in their candidacy, but I can't. I just don't believe either of those parties care about people as a structure, as a party. Individuals, I'm sure they do, but I don't want to run under either of those. Our state has 1.4 million people in 2020 that didn't vote at all, who were registered voters, could have but didn't, and 950,000 straight party Republican ballots, 590,000 straight party Democratic ballots, and then a smattering of mixed ballot voting, compared to the 1.4 million. And everybody I talked to who said they didn't vote previously was because they didn't feel that either party cared about what they wanted. So I don't want to put a moniker next to my name for the potential clout or influence if it's going to actually detract from the majority in terms of number of people per group, the majority that aren't voting in the first place. That doesn't show a sign of confidence, in my opinion. So I didn't run under it.
And what's your plan to get in front of those 1.4 million non-voters as an independent candidate, because one of the reasons that people do run as a Republican or a Democrat. I think it happens less often in the Republican Party that somebody would run even though they're critical of the party. Generally, people, for some reason, who run as Republicans are true believers. But there are people who run as Democrats that are, I'm just using the ballot line because, like you said, this party will allow you to run basically no matter what. So I'm just going to use it. And there's a reason for that, because a lot of it's you've got this built-in base here, and then you can work on expanding it. And so by not running as a Democrat, you're losing this built-in base, or a Republican, you're losing this built-in base with the hopes of activating people who in many instances have never voted before, or it's been a very long time. So what's the plan to activate this group of non-voters, which is, to be fair, very, very large?
Very large, but also it's a challenge. I'm not saying it's easy. I am saying I would rather do what I consider the right thing that's harder than try to go the easy way out, for two reasons. A, it feels disingenuous just to put a letter next to my name because it may get me some help. And also, the people I'm trying to reach aren't going to vote for me if I'm with a letter next to my name. Like, if I pick either of those teams, the ones I'm talking to won't vote for me. And there's people that are supporting me now that are on inside of both of those groups. It's not the vast majority, but there are people who, if I had signed on either of the other teams, there's no way they would be even talking to me right now. But because I'm not a part of their the other team for them, I'm a viable option at that point. It's like, oh, well, I'm not contradicting my family heritage and my history and everything my family has done for generations by supporting you. You're not a Democrat, or you're not a Republican. So sure, let's get in that boat and see where we can go. How we plan on reaching everybody, a lot of that, because it's a grassroots campaign, is digital outreach. And, the people we're trying to reach are 45 and under, generally speaking. So they are, within a decade or so of me, and at the top level, and then down to 18-year-olds who are just getting registered. And a lot of that is online. Like, people usually ask, like, hey, we haven't seen a TV ad. And I'm like, okay, well, like, who else have you seen? Because I'm only aware of one person that's been running TV ads because they have lots of money. I don't. So I will be doing everything word of mouth and digital, and then in person when I can make those events and things like that around the state.
Jared Budlong, independent candidate for governor. If folks are interested, how can they learn more and sign up to help the campaign?
Yep, it's jaredalgov.org. So jaredalgov.org.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.